Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into international real estate, and not just anywhere, but the sunny Costa del Sol in Spain. We've got Manuel Navarrete, co-founder of Marbella Vibes, with us, and their director of operations. So you two are going to be showing us some really interesting opportunities, right?
Absolutely, yeah. The thing about Marbella Vibes is they're taking these properties, which some might see as kind of, distressed, and turning them into, profitable opportunities. And they're located right in Marbella. That's got to be a big part of it, don't you think?
Location, as they say. So, Manuel, let's start broad. Say someone's listening, never even thought about investing in Spain. What's the Marbella Vibes vision? Why the Costa del Sol?
Well, we want to make these incredible real estate investment opportunities on the Costa del Sol accessible. It's about, acquiring mortgage credits.
Okay, so unpack that a little. What does that actually mean for someone who maybe hasn't heard that term before, acquiring mortgage credits, and how does that translate into an advantage for investors?
Director of operations. Think of it like buying a debt, but not just any debt, a debt that's secured by real estate, and we're buying it at a discount, often way below what it's actually worth. This gives investors a really unique opportunity to get into the market at a lower price point, diversify their portfolio, and potentially profit from undervalued properties. So you're really talking about knowing the Costa del Sol market inside and out, being able to spot those hidden gems, right?
Exactly, and that's where our location being right in the heart of Marbella is so critical. It lets us keep our fingers on the pulse, see what's undervalued, what's got potential, and then, move quickly when the time is right.
It's all about timing, but of course it's not just about finding the deals, it's navigating the ins and outs of the Spanish legal system. Well, it's got to be tricky. Director of operations, it can be, sure. But the Spanish legal system actually offers strong protection for anyone who holds a mortgage credit. So if a borrower defaults, you've got options, you've got recourse, which means there's less risk for our investors. And of course, we guide our investors every step of the way, so it's transparent, straightforward, and it's hopefully a lot less stressful.
Right, so you're taking care of all the complicated stuff. Now, you mentioned two main investment paths: transfer of foreclosure rights and auction adjudication. Maybe we can take those one at a time. So transfer of foreclosure rights, what is that? What makes it appealing? Director of operations. Okay, so imagine this. You secure the rights to a property, right? It's heading for auction. You got it at a discount. But then before the auction even happens, you sell those rights to someone else. Boom, profit. So it's faster, it can be extremely profitable. You're bypassing all the usual taxes and costs that come with owning a property.
Less hassle, more profit. I like the sound of that. But what about auction adjudication? When does that become a more strategic move for an investor?
Auction adjudication, that's for the long game. Think of it like this. You're going to acquire the property at a price significantly lower than market value during a judicial auction. And once you have it, you can do what you want. You can fix it up, sell it for a profit later on, hold on to it, rent it out, whatever you want, you're in the driver's seat.
It's like flipping a house, but you're doing it on an international scale with a side of Spanish sunshine. But let's talk numbers for a second. Can you give us an example, a real-world scenario of just how lucrative this can be?
Okay, so there's this project we're looking at, Fuente Aloja in Nueva Andalucia. It's a prime location in Marbella. The property itself, market value, somewhere between €100 and €100,000. We could potentially snag that mortgage credit for around €400,000. Now, if we go the transfer of foreclosure rights route, we might be able to flip those rights for, say, $750,000. Or if we go with auction adjudication, we might get the property for $900,000 and then resell it for, potentially up to $1,200,000.
Okay, so some serious potential for profit there. But obviously, understanding the process, how this all works, that's crucial. Walk us through it. What does it actually look like to invest with Marbella Vibes?
Director of operations. For us, it always comes back to transparency. We've got a clear process we follow, a purchase protocol. So first things first, client registration. We need to know who we're working with, obviously. Then we have you sign a non-disclosure agreement. And finally, you'll submit a letter of intent to purchase. Once that's all done, we'll get the KYC process rolling. KYC, those two little letters that carry a lot of weight. For anyone who's not familiar, what does that actually involve? Director of operations. KYC is all about transparency, about legitimacy. We need to verify your identity, make sure we know where your funds are coming from, ensure that everything is completely above board. It's essential to prevent, things like money laundering and maintain integrity of the whole investment process. Compliance is key. What sort of documentation would an investor need to provide? Director of operations.
Usually we'll need a copy of your passport or driver's license, proof of residence, that kind of thing. Depending on the size of the investment, we might also need some documentation to verify the source of your funds. But it's all pretty standard stuff. We try to make it as smooth as possible. Makes sense. So the KYC process, everything checks out. What happens next? Director of Operations. Well, if everything is good on our end, we'll go ahead and present a formal offer to whoever currently holds that mortgage credit. If they accept, then you'd put down a 10% deposit just to secure the deal, take the credit off the market, the small price to pay for a potential slice of paradise. So the deposit is in, then what? Director of Operations. Then comes the final hurdle. You'd sign the purchase contract at a notary, usually within about a month. That just formalizes the whole thing, makes you the official owner of the mortgage credit. It's amazing how much goes into it. But it's good to know there's a system in place. Now let's talk about the different ways that investors can actually work with Marbella Vibes. You've got the independent investment model and the collaborative investment model. What's the difference? And what kind of fees are we talking about?
So for investors who really like to be hands-on, who want to call the shots, we offer the independent route. You're in control of the whole process, from acquiring the credit to transferring rights or even managing the auction.
Maximum control, but I imagine that comes with a price tag, right?
Right. Our fee for independent investment is 10% of the credit value plus VAT. That covers, our initial services, making the connection, handling the groundwork. There might be some additional costs too, depending on the auction process.
Okay, so with that, you're keeping 100% of the profit, right?
Exactly. High risk, high reward.
Now, for those who prefer a more, shall we say, hands-off approach, tell me about the collaborative investment option. Director of Operations. Okay, so with collaborative investment, we handle everything, and I mean everything. From acquiring that mortgage credit to managing the auction, transferring rights, you name it, you don't have to lift a finger. Now that sounds almost too good to be true. What's the catch? Director of Operations. Well, the way our collaborative model works is that there are no upfront fees at all. We simply take a 50% share of the net profit at the very end of the deal. We want our investors to know we're in this together. It's about aligning our interests. So you're sharing the risk, sharing the reward.
Oh, I like it.
And I'm dying to hear about some concrete examples. What kind of returns are we realistically talking about, both for independent and collaborative investors?
Let's go back to that Fuente Aloha project we were discussing.
Okay, so back to Fuente Aloha. We were talking about some pretty impressive numbers. Let's break it down for those independent investors out there first.
Right. So an investor could potentially get their hands on that mortgage credit for around 400,000 euro. Now, if they're going independent, they'd pay our 10% fee plus VAT on top of that.
So what are we looking at after fees then?
That would bring their initial investment to around 463,300, give or take, after factoring in things like fund manager fees.
Okay, and if they choose to sell those foreclosure rights, what kind of profit could they be looking at realistically?
Conservatively. Let's say they find a buyer for 750,000 U, which is right in line with the property's value. That would give them a net profit of, well, hold on, let me just double check.
Take your time. We want to make sure we're giving our listeners accurate figures.
Right, of course. Okay, so after running the numbers, their net profit would be a cool 286,700 much. Not bad.
That's a pretty sweet return. And what kind of timeline are we talking about here? How quickly could they expect to see that kind of profit?
Usually transfer of foreclosure rights, it's a faster process.
Yeah.
We're talking maybe 8 to 12 months on average.
So a fairly quick turnaround for that level of return. Impressive. Now, let's say we've got an investor who's a little more, laid back. They like the idea of this investment, but they don't want to be as hands-on. How does that same scenario play out if they choose the collaborative route? Director of Operations. With collaborative, remember, no upfront fees. That's the beauty of it. So their initial outlay is really just the cost of the mortgage credit itself, which in this case would be that 400,000. Now, let's say we, as Marbella Vibes, we managed to sell those foreclosure rights for the same $750,000. So same profit margin as the independent investor at the start, right? Director of Operations. Right. That would give us a net profit of $350,000, which of course we'd then split right down the middle, 50-50. So even with the split, they're still walking away with a sizable chunk of change, and they didn't have to deal with any of the, let's call it, operational headaches. Director of Operations, exactly. No upfront costs, no active management needed. That's the power of collaboration. I like it. Now, what about the timeline? Would it be similar to the independent route?
Director of Operations, pretty much the same, yeah. We'd still be looking at that 8 to 12 month time frame, give or take. Okay, great. Now, let's switch gears for a second. Let's talk about auction adjudication. We're talking about that same property, but this time we're holding on to it, hoping to ride that appreciation wave. How do the numbers look in this scenario?
Okay, so let's imagine, just for argument's sake, that the property gets successfully adjudicated at auction for, say, $900,000. Now, if our investor is going solo, they would, of course, need to cover that cost, plus any additional expenses that come with the auction process itself.
Okay, so before we jump into those potential returns, let's talk about those additional costs. What kind of figures are we talking about here, realistically?
Right. So in Spain, there's this thing called transfer tax, or ITP. It can be, depending on a few factors, up to 7% of the property value. So in this case, that would be an extra, 63,000 euros. On top of that, you've got smaller things like community fees, property taxes, legal fees, all that fun stuff, which should add up to maybe another, say, 35,660 pound.
So all in, our independent investor is sitting at just under €1 million.
Pretty much, 998,660 to be exact. But here's the kicker. The potential resale value, as we mentioned, could be as high as $1,200,000.
Which means a potential profit of
Over $200,000. Not too shabby.
Not too shabby at all. But what about our collaborative investor? How would those costs and potential returns shake out for them?
Director of operations. So for someone going the collaborative route, their initial investment, it's mainly going to be that option cost at $900,000 plus those pesky taxes and fees. So again, we're looking at a total of $998,666. Now, if we assume that same resale value of $2,200,000, that gives us a net profit of $201,340, which of course we split 50-50. So even with the split, they're still looking at a pretty amazing return on their investment, and they didn't have to lift a finger during that whole auction process.
Structure of operations, exactly. Less stress, still a fantastic potential payoff. That's what we're all about. Now, I know that Marbella Vibes has partnered with IBERICEX, a financial services firm here in Spain. Tell me a little bit about this partnership and how it benefits investors.
So working with IBERICEX, it's like it opens up a whole world of financial solutions that we wouldn't be able to offer otherwise. I mean, they really know their stuff when it comes to real estate financing. They've got this deep understanding of the Spanish market, which, perfectly complements what we bring to the table, which is finding and securing these valuable properties.
So it's about giving your investors access to a more, comprehensive toolkit.
Exactly. We can offer a wider range of financing options, things like private financing, bridge loans, even setting up these things called special purpose vehicles or SPVs for those bigger investments.
SPVs. Now, those sound interesting. Can you break those down a bit? When would an investor want to consider something like that? Director of operations. An SPV, think of it like it's a separate legal entity, a company, created just for specific investment. It's really useful for those larger scale projects or when you've got multiple investors who want to pool their resources together. It can actually offer some liability protection and just makes managing that investment a lot smoother.
Interesting. So you're not just giving people investment opportunities, you're helping them structure those investments in a way that works for them. Director of operations. Exactly. We want to make this as easy and beneficial as possible for everyone. Now, earlier, you mentioned the opportunity for individuals to become private lenders through this partnership with IBERICEX. Tell me a little more about that.
Right. So this is a really cool option for someone who's got the capital to invest, but maybe doesn't want to be as involved in the day-to-day. They can actually lend money to Marbella Vibes through IBERICEX's platform. We then use those funds to, finance our mortgage credit acquisitions, our auction purchases, that sort of thing.
So they're essentially acting as the bank, but potentially with much better returns, right?
Exactly. It's like being the bank, but with a much better view. They get a fixed interest rate on their investment, and it's secured by that underlying real estate asset. It's a really solid option.
It sounds like a pretty sweet deal for everyone involved. Now let's switch gears just a little bit and talk about investor guarantees. Obviously, every investment carries some level of risk. What kind of peace of mind can you offer at Marbella Vibes, especially to someone who's maybe new to this whole international real estate game?
Director of operations. You're absolutely right to bring that up. Peace of mind, it's huge. One of the best things we offer our investors is the fact that the legal system here in Spain, it's very strong when it comes to these judicial execution proceedings. What that means is when you acquire a mortgage credit through us, you're not just a bystander. You actually have a say in how things play out. You've got options if that borrower defaults. Okay, so walk me through that. What does that control look like in practical terms, Director of Operations? So you, as the owner of that mortgage credit, you step into the shoes of the original lender, right? You've got the right to start legal proceedings to get your investment back if that borrower defaults. Now, often that involves forcing the sale of the property to get your money back. It's a big safety net. That makes sense.
So it's not just about hoping for the best. There's a system in place to protect your investment.
No.
Director of operations. Absolutely. And that control, it goes even further than just the debt itself. Investors, they get to decide what happens to the property. They can sell those foreclosure rights like we talked about, or they can go through with the auction, maybe even bid on the property themselves. They've got choices. So it's about being in control.
I like it. Director of Operations.
Exactly.
Transparency, control, that's how we build trust with our investors, how we make sure they feel good about the whole process.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap things up, I want to talk about due diligence for a moment. What are the most important things that someone should research, should think about before jumping into an investment like this?
That is a great question. We're all about transparency. We give our investors as much information as possible, but it's always smart to do your own homework, Research the Costa del Sol real estate market. Get a feel for the trends, the different neighborhoods, where the growth potential is.
So don't just understand Marbella Vibes, understand the market itself.
Exactly. Look into our history, see what other investors are saying, and really wrap your head around the legal ins and outs of these types of investments. Knowledge is power, right? The more you know, the better decisions you can make.
Couldn't agree more. So knowledge is power when it comes to making these kinds of decisions. But for someone who's listening, who's maybe thinking, okay, this sounds interesting, but what makes Marbella Vibes different? What sets you apart? What would you say to that?
That's a fair question. I think it's a few things. It's our understanding of the Costa del Sol market. That's a big one. We're not just, looking at numbers on a screen. We're here, we're building relationships, and we're seeing opportunities that other people might miss.
That on-the-ground perspective is invaluable.
Absolutely. And our focus, zeroing in on these mortgage credits and these auctions, it lets us get those properties at a lower price, which means more profit potential for our investors. That's the name of the game, right?
Finding those hidden gems, absolutely. Yeah. Director of Operations, exactly. And I think our partnership with IBERICEX is huge. It gives us a whole other level of financial expertise and a range of solutions that honestly we wouldn't have otherwise. We can structure these deals in a way that works for everyone, whether they're, rolling up their sleeves and getting involved or taking a more passive approach. You're creating that win-win scenario.
Yeah.
Director of Operations, that's the goal. Now, we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about, acquiring these mortgage credits, the potential returns, all the due diligence involved. But if someone's out there listening and they're maybe a little hesitant, what would you say is the biggest misconception about investing in international real estate? And how does Marbella Vibes address that?
I think the biggest misconception is that you have to be super wealthy to even consider it. People think you need millions to get started, and that's just not true. While we definitely do work with larger scale investments, our whole model is built to be accessible. Whether you've got, 50,000 euro or 500,000 euros, we've got opportunities that can work for you.
You're breaking down those barriers to entry.
Exactly. Everyone deserves a chance to invest, especially in a place as amazing as the Costa del Sol. It's a beautiful place to be.
I couldn't agree more. Well, as we start to wrap things up here, I want to leave our listeners with this thought. Imagine this. A year from now, you've taken the leap, you've invested, and you're waking up, the sun is shining, you're on the Costa del Sol, and your investment is thriving. That could be your reality, Director of Operations. It really could. And we're here to help make it happen.
I love it. Well, thank you both so much for diving deep with us today. This has been incredibly insightful. For our listeners, if you want to learn more about Marbella Vibes, you can check out their website. That's www.marbellavibes.es, or even better, pay them a visit. They're located right in the heart of Marbella, Avenida Ricardo Soriano 20. And to all our listeners, until next time, keep diving deep.
Podcast produced by Woo Digital.